Hi, my name is Meghna, and today we're going to be talking about the control over bodily autonomy in Bloodchild and The Husband Stitch. Both of these short stories have a very interesting look on the way that power dynamics are interpreted between two people, where one party is able to carry children and reproduce, and the other party is able to initiate a sort of coercion over the other because of their ability to reproduce, if that makes any sense. So I found that both Gan and the speaker being pregnant with the other's child, in a sense, makes the other party feel like they have the rights to their body and their ability to control them. And I just find it really interesting in the similarities. I find it really interesting the similarities between the way that both Tagoichoi and the husband are able to manipulate Gan and the speaker into a sort of futile state where they don't feel like they have the power to say no. And so that's how my thesis arose, that in both Octavia Butler's The Bloodchild and Maria Carmen Machado's The Husband Stitch, possessing reproductive capabilities causes characters to be coerced by others into denying themselves agency. And again, I think it's interesting to note how both stories deal with this topic differently. In one character is male and the other is female, even though possessing reproductive capabilities is a very feminine trait. And as I said before, the two texts that we are going to be talking about are Bloodchild and The Husband Stitch. And my supporting arguments for this thesis is that in Bloodchild, Gan's designation as a possible carrier of Tagoichoi's offspring leads Tagoichoi to manipulate Gan into giving up his bodily autonomy. We see this throughout the story as we slowly have Gan realizing the repercussions that bearing children has, and realizing that it's at the cost of his pain that brings Tagoichoi pleasure. And again, we see the same thing with The Husband Stitch, where the husband believes once he's granted access to the speaker's body and given birth, he possesses the right to herself. Basically, that her pain doesn't matter in the face of his pleasure. And again, you can even see it in the title of these two books. The Bloodchild and The Husband Stitch are both things that bring pleasure to the other party at the cost of another. In both cases, reproductive capability is a trait that others use as an excuse to objectify and claim possession over the holder. And in both of these cases, coercion is utilized, blurring the lines between consent over autonomy in a fashion that presents the illusion of choice, in a way that one party is able to victimize themselves and victim blame the other into giving in their rights, because they feel like they're the ones that are being strained for not just automatically giving themselves up to the other party. And then again, the wider implications of this, I found that it's important to note the gendered nature of bearing children, and how in both stories it's the character that carries offspring, typically the female, that's denied power over their body and thoughts, and what this means in general context for our current society. And I think it's interesting to note, like I mentioned before, the subversion of gender norms, but in the end, it ends up in the same ending where both characters have to give in. And again, I find it interesting to compare that both the husband and Tagoichoi are very not cruel people. What they're doing in this story is just a small glimpse of what happens commonly in both worlds. And that's almost the horrific implication of it all, that they're not cruel, that they're being so kind in a sense that makes it harder for the other characters to resist because they feel unreasonable. And then my secondary sources are in defense of not knowing uncertainty in contemporary narratives of sexual violence, which deals with the idea, as mentioned before, of gaslighting and manipulation as presented in The Husband Stitch. And Would You Really Rather Die Than Bear My Young? The Construction of Gender, Race, and Species, and Octavia E. Butler's Bloodchild, which deals with, as mentioned in the title, the construction of gender, race, and species in Bloodchild, and how the conflation between power and gender plays a role in the power dynamics between the two. And here's my We're excited page and my meme. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentation.